I always tell my teams that budgeting for anything that's in hypergrowth mode is really, really hard. I mean, trying to like predict anything in life that's literally doubling each year. It's kind of like the stupid carnival trick where they spin you around, they blindfold you, and they ask you to throw a dart at a board that's also moving. That's what budgeting in hypergrowth mode feels like. And so here are a couple tips.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Run the Numbers. And what you're about to hear is me. I'm the guest. And I do a solid hour. I can't believe I actually did that long, and maybe a little bit shorter once we cut out all the oohs and ums that I rely on as a crutch. But I did an entire hour on annual planning. Yeah, that's right. So start your engines if you've got a budget to make. When we go through the kickoff, aka where to start, we go through building sales capacity, modeling out rep time, pod ratios, quota deployment, over assignment. Don't tell anyone about over assignment. It's a secret. Designing a marketing budget and working with your CMO, and costing out the full P&L. So get ready. Annual planning deep dive. Let's do it. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. As a CFO, I can say firsthand that the most important thing to know is how money enters and leaves the building. Full stop. Without a simple and easy to monitor financial system, you're flying blind. And I'm the kind of guy who likes to have all my tools in one place. I'm talking checking accounts, bill pay, credit cards, and everything else I need to run a business. I'm pumped that Mercury is both a sponsor of this podcast and a safe place to keep my cash. It sure beats keeping my cash under my mattress again. Plus, it looks slick. I always get angry when back office tools are ugly. Newsflash. Finance people may wear both a belt and suspenders to work, but we like stuff that looks good too. Sorry, I just had to get that off my chest. Mercury simplifies your financial operations with powerful banking, giving you greater control, precision, and speed so you can operate at your best. Make the switch today, like I did. Tell them your boy CJ from Run the Numbers sent you. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Banking Trust. Members FDIC. All right, so why is annual planning even a thing? It's kind of a forcing function to get the org in shape for the company's next chapter. I'm a big boxing fan. I talk about it on the podcast from time to time. And they say that the hardest part of any fight is training that leads up to it, the training camp. And the fight itself is really just a culmination of all your work. And I think of the operating plan in a lot of sense of you're doing this build up, you're checking what's possible, you're checking your fitness. That's your training camp to get in shape for the next year. And then you let the rubber hit the road and let the results shake out, and you can measure them against that plan. And so who will be involved in annual planning, this training camp per se? When we think about company-wide planning, it spans 5 major groups. So you have product/R&D, research and development. You have marketing or your community group. You have your sales group, you have customer success, and you have customer support. And I tend to think of this as somewhat of a cycle that is iterative and repeats itself, with each function providing feedback to the loop. Okay, so it keeps going here. So to start, we need a great product to sell. Full stop. Then we market its value prop to our customers and community. And if they validate that they like the product, we sell it to our sales team, right? And then post-sale, they're passed to customer success so they get the most value from the product, which hopefully sets them up for an expansion opportunity down the road. And finally, we empower our customer support team to solve for any issues that pop up post-implementation. So I was kind of drawing a circle there. More broadly, you can break it into 2 subgroups. So you got people that build the product and people that sell the product. And for this planning exercise, as finance and strategy folks tuning in here, we're assuming you already have a great product to sell. I can't really help you much there, guys, if you don't. So you just need to figure out the best way to staff it, sell it, and support it. All right. The cycle will start with the CEO and CFO. You may actually be both those people at this stage if it's a smaller company just getting off the ground. And they're going to discuss high level revenue, productivity, and profitability targets that are going to frame up this mission. And then it's going to extend to leaders from the sales, marketing, customer success, product engineering, finance, people team, so on. And finally, it's going to get approved by your board, which is probably why you're actually embarking on this annual planning process in the first place. So the TLDR, by the way, I didn't know what TLDR meant. Too long, didn't read. I didn't know what it meant for like 3 years, and I'd been using it. So coming here. So the audience is CEO and CFO, starting point, department leaders, input, and then board confirmation. Boom, bang, boom. Targets, revenue, how much you make, productivity, your ratio of people to revenue, and profitability or burn, how much you make or lose, baby, cash money. Bottoms up versus tops down. Is it top down or tops down? I always say tops down, and some people correct me, but I don't really care. My podcast. So what we're going to build in this training camp is a bottoms up budget. So a bottoms up budget is one that's built using units of revenue and units of cost. And you're going to forecast both out over time using activity-based assumptions. So in other words, we start at the furthest level, we can drill down, the atomic unit. And it really means doing a lot of price times quantity math over and over and over again in a model. And so, as we had mentioned, the CEO and CFO have to come up with a tops down, back of the envelope budget as a starting point. But you need to go and build from the bottoms to up to triangulate if that's even possible. Okay. So the guiding questions for the CEO and CFO, I'll give you a couple of examples to get everyone in motion. You can write these down if you want. So the first one is, how fast would we like to grow our revenue next year? Is it faster than last year? Slower? By how much will the board accept? So where are you in that maturity curve? Are you expected to keep getting faster as you first find product market fit and start to hire salespeople? Or are you later in the maturity curve where you're just trying to keep that number up? Next one is, how much money can we spend to get there? So check your bank account. And are we planning on raising again next year? That's an important one to get on the same page. Like, are we planning for a fundraise at some point within the next 12 months? Because that'll inform how aggressive you can go on the spend. And how many people will we hire? How does the headcount growth compare to revenue growth? And finally, how profitable do we want to be? The $1 million question. And so I look at these questions as guardrails that you have to stay within as you build your bottoms up plan, right? Because it's kind of hard to go into it blindly without like any context. That's why I like these guiding questions. And so I may set out as the FP&A person saying, listen, we know we need to grow minimally 75% next year. We grew 125% this year. It'd be hard to actually do bigger than that at scale. And we know the board won't accept anything less than 75%. Just back of my head, I know that. And then you may say, we can't burn more than 5 million because we only have 10 million left in the bank, and we're not planning on doing another fundraise this coming year, so we don't want to spend this thing into the ground. You may also say we need to get, let's say, 10% more efficient with our revenue per head to show we have leverage in the operating model. And that would mean, rough math, we can't hire any more than 50 people. So I know just based on that envelope, 50 people is probably the max. And then you may say, we need to have our cash burn from January to December. I know what we're going to go into the year burning, but like, let's make a plan towards the end to get out burning half as much. And this will tie into the longer term plan, which we'll talk about later, because we know we're not going to be profitable this year. And so there's this fancy word called interlock, and that's really just like people having a meeting and agreeing on stuff and basically taking the coconut over here and the coconut over here and banging them together and saying, do these work together? I have no idea why I just came up with that reference. So you're going to use the CEO and CFO's high level guidelines, and then finance will work with each of the department leaders to create what I call a budget envelope. And that's going to be comprised of direct and indirect costs. And so the simplest way to do this is to pass them out to your department leaders with templates and allow them to put some inputs in around the new heads they need, phased by quarter, a list of new tools they'll need to be productive, and placeholders for flex capacity or contractors. And then something else you may also throw in there is like how many times they want to travel. So once again, I'm just creating a simple slide that's empty for them to fill in. I'm going to ask them, let me check how many max heads you need. We'll phase them in by quarter, and also write down new tools that you want, and also some placeholders for contractors. for special projects that we may not have somebody in-house with the specialty to do it. And then how many times you want to get together with your team. And so after completing templates with each leader, finance is going to do a roll-up of the asks and compare to the company targets we discussed before. So total headcount asked, how does this compare to my target productivity per head? Remember in that reference you said we can't add more than 50 people than we're at now? Maybe you're rolling up to like 75 people. So you already know that you get some work to do. And you're going to need to go into those interlocks and figure it out. Productive capacity. So how much quota does this allow me to deploy compared to my sales target? And then an estimated cost of total resources. So what am I burdening my P&L with? That's a fancy way of saying like how much cost am I throwing into this thing if I gave everybody what they wanted? And so finance will orchestrate interlocks between the functions that have dependent resources to compare asks. So like I said, interlock is a fancy word for agreeing on goals. And so product and engineering are two of the key groups that need to interlock. So staffing the product and engineering pods need to be done together because the product team usually works in a ratio to the engineering team to get stuff done in sprints. And then sales and marketing teams need to have an interlock. So they need to build enough pipeline on the marketing side to knock down the sales targets and come up with a multiple of like, say, we need 3x marketing pipeline in order to close our goals for sales, right? So we think 1x of that will close. And then finance and recruiting is another one that people underestimate that needs to interlock. So you have to figure out the capacity and the cadence for hiring. Finance is there in each interlock and orchestrating it to listen in, ask questions, and spot any dependencies or blind spots that may come up. And eventually, finance is going to give each department a max headcount per quarter. So what you're going to say is, listen, let's work to stay at or below this max headcount figure for your department each quarter. And that max headcount figure is really important because, how do I say this? There are only so many parking spots in the org. So think about like your organization as a big parking lot. What ends up happening is if people think they're incremental heads that they're getting on top of what they already have, what inevitably happens is people move from one department to the next, and you end up creating an incremental backfill for the person who gave up somebody who went from maybe the product team to the engineering team. Something else that happens is they may have had 2 headcount that were open and being recruited for in this year's budget, and they haven't hit yet, and they assume that those 2 heads are on top of what they already asked for if they were doing incremental. So let's say that they had a team of 10, they had 2 open, and they asked for 5 incremental. You may think that the budget for next year is 15, 10 plus 5, but their interpretation is that it's 10 plus the 2 that are open, 12 plus 5, which is 17. Now you have a budget that doesn't foot. So I think that max headcount per quarter should be one of the biggest takeaways that you walk away with from this. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 38,000 businesses, wow, that's a lot of companies, have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one platform. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're able to peer into the future and seize new opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. METRICS, metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Annual planning season is upon us. That's right, my favorite time of year. And it's not just about setting goals for the coming year. It's about ensuring you have the right tools in place to measure and achieve those goals. As a SaaS CFO, I know having access to reliable, real-time metrics is crucial for my annual planning process. That's why I'm so excited to partner with today's sponsor, Maxio. Maxio is a billing and financial operations platform that helps subscription businesses reconcile bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, and SaaS metrics automatically. By the way, guys, bookings, billings, GAAP revenue, not the same thing. Got to get them straight. Because these numbers are the foundation of your financial models, it's important to have quick access and trust that they are correct. Don't let the complexities of SaaS finance and accounting slow you down. If you want to start 2025 with the right tools, check out Maxio by visiting maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Request a demo through our link to support the podcast, ya boy, and receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. maxio.com/run the numbers. Please, guys, I really need this. All right, let's jump into the second point that I want to take you through, and this is building sales capacity. So I want to teach you how to model out sales capacity so you can assign quota and verify that that tops down meets the bottoms up. And you're going to calibrate this using a combo of historical figures through a lens of what behaviors you really want to incentivize for next year. Incentives drive outcomes. Charlie Munger. So what is sales capacity? Think of sales capacity as the size of your company's engine or its revenue potential. So when you start the year, you may only have a 16-gallon tank, which can take you up to 250 miles, to use a car reference here. But if you keep hiring throughout the year, you can add additional capacity. It's like that fuel tank is getting bigger. And the people you have on board get better. You start to get better gas mileage, and they mature in their roles, build their own pipeline, not just marketing, and they get to know the product they're selling. So you want to tune your engine's productive capacity to be able to hit a certain mile marker along the way. And that's really your quota plan, okay? So the quota that you're setting, it should actually grow throughout the year because A, people are ramping in their jobs, and then you're hiring incremental people. And so a sales capacity model is a bottoms up build of your company's revenue potential, and you're using each account exec as the atomic unit. They're bringing in new deals, and they're the building blocks. And so based on their specific segments, so it could be small SMB, which is small businesses, mid-market, and then enterprise. A rep should have an annualized quota target that they're expected to hit when they're fully up to speed or ramp. And like I said, you add reps to the mix throughout the year to come up with an effective bottoms-up quota capacity. So let's say you have 14 bodies and seats, but you may actually only have 11.5 effective reps at that point in time because some of them aren't fully up to speed yet, right? So you can't just equate it to, oh, well, I've hired 14 people. It's, well, how long have they actually been in their seats? And you have to actually figure out how long it takes to ramp. So enterprise is going to take longer to ramp, and the deal cycles are longer for dollars to start showing up from somebody who starts on day one than SMB. So something that is an input to this model is what I call quota to OTE ratio. So OTE is on target earnings. It's someone's salary plus their commissions if they were to hit 100%, right? So as a rule of thumb, this usually starts around 4x or 5x, and it can grow over time to 7x or more if the company adds more products and enhances its brand awareness in the market. So if a rep's on target earnings is 200,000, then the quota should minimally be 1 million, right? 1 million divided by 200,000 equals 5x, check. You can also do it in the opposite direction. The quota to OTE ratio is also going to be higher for, like I said, enterprise reps who have the ability to close larger deals to retire quota. You have to remember that, like, it should be a bigger target if you're paying a person more and they have potential customers in their pipeline who buy bigger deals, right? If I'm selling to the gas station down the street that's a mom and pop versus selling to Johnson & Johnson, that's a different deal potential there, and it should be reflected in the quota. Enterprise reps sometimes have an OTE ratio between 6x or 7x since they can smash some absolute ding-dongs of deals. And so ramping, let's talk about that for a while. So ramping is when an AE starts at a company, they will typically get a prorated quota that goes up in either a linear or curved fashion while they get up to speed. In typical ramps that I use in my models, you can adjust them slightly for years. SMB, I say 2 to 3 months. So you should go from basically like showing up on the job and getting a computer placed in your hands to 100% productive within 3 months. Commercial and mid-market, I usually say 4 to 6 months, and then enterprise 6 to 9 months. Some companies think it can take almost a year to ramp an enterprise rep, which also tells you why it's so costly to make bad hiring decisions because you're paying someone who's not going to work out, and then you have to ramp somebody all over again, right? You have to rehire somebody, and it takes more time. So payout structures when someone's ramping, it could be prorated, so you have a lower monthly or quarterly target, the same or lower base commission rate. You can adjust both of those. You can adjust the target or you can adjust the commission rate applied to it. You could have a non-recoverable draw. That's when the rep is paid their fully variable commission rate in advance, regardless of what their achievement may be. Or you could have a recoverable draw, which is like, it's kind of cruel, but the rep is paid their fully variable commission rate in advance, but it functions as essentially a loan, right? Where the rep pays the company back using a portion of future commission checks. You're made whole if they can't do the job. And best believe company will collect. So then within this sales capacity model, you're going to have to decide between the mix of new and existing deal volume, right? Because you want to sell a customer multiple times, and hopefully you have multiple things to sell them off the back of the truck. And so if reps hit the number by way of new deals and expansion deals, you have to figure out the appropriate split. So if you have a brand new geography, let's say you're moving into Asia, you've never sold anything before, you can't really expect the expansion deal volume to be that high there. And if you're hiring new reps off the street, unless they're inheriting accounts that someone else used to hold and actually kept them warm, they're going to need to make their quotas off a high mix of new deals. So you want to make sure that this comes out in your modeling. You have to make sure that the new and existing split is reasonable. And a lot of times what I'll look at is the historicals from last year, and then I'll slightly move the expansion dollars up as a percentage of 100. So maybe last year we made our number off of 70% new, 30% expansion, but I'm saying my install base next year is bigger. So within this specific segment, I actually expect it to be 35% expansion or 40% expansion because there are more existing customers to sell into. And by the way, if you sell multi-year deals, so now we're getting into like the real inside baseball here, you can check who's even up for renewal within this next year. If they're not, like maybe you don't put a ton of expansion dollars there because you don't have a compelling opportunity to sell them more of the same product or something new, right? All right, over assignment. So most companies, secret between us on the pod, right? We're all friends. Most companies overassign quotas by 20 or 30% to make sure that they can hit their company-wide revenue plan. And so the simplest way to think about this is if you added up all the individual quotas from reps on the street, it would sum to a number that's larger than that of the actual board plan, right? Best of luck trying to pull all those reps though and get them all to give you their numbers. Haha. That range is going to be smaller companies with less management layers, and it's going to increase as there are more mouths to feed. This provides a buffer against sales rep attrition, underperformance, big deals pushing that's happened to all of us, and macro headwinds. So if the economy sucks, so you have some cushion there. And the overassignment by segment is going to vary, right? So you want to add cushion where the risk is. I'll say it again. So add cushion where the risk is. So typically the enterprise segment has the most risk, and therefore you'll give it the most cushion, right? So you may only give SMB 120% assignment. Enterprise, you may do 135, 140, 150%. And that's, like I said, because the reps take longer to get up to speed in the enterprise. It takes longer to figure out if they're good or not. Sometimes you have to kill off the reps. And then if someone leaves, like we said, partway through the rep, you have to go and find somebody new. So attrition really sucks. And you have big deals up market with longer procurement cycles, more complex approval chains, like try to get something approved by Johnson & Johnson. That'll probably take a year alone. And they can push from one quarter to the next. So add cushion where the risk is. And when you think about attainment, not all reps hit their quota. So I was talking to Ryan Walsh, CEO and founder of RepView, and he was saying that it's like closer to 40% actually hit their quota. So as a rule of thumb, typically, a handful of them will, a few will come 80% close, and then you'll always have one or two that are absolutely smashing it. But the percentage of reps hitting their quota goes down over time as the company gets larger, as deals become more complex, and as territories become more crowded. Like I said, may even drop to like the 40% range. Seasonality is something you're going to want to reflect in your sales model. So all quarters are not created equal. You're going to need to plan your rep ramp time and their effective capacity to line up with your market's buying seasonality, right? So you have to staff to when people want to buy. So typically speaking, about 60% of a software company's business is in the second half of the year, of which 40% could be in Q4, of which 20% could be in December, of which 10% could be in the last week of the quarter. And so you get where I'm going with this. I worked at a company once. I remember we closed like 5% of our total company's sales in the last day, maybe even been like the last afternoon of the year. What this means is you can't clobber a rep with this insane Q4 quota if they've only been on the job for a few months, right? They need to get there over time. And what I would walk away, another nugget for you, is hire reps earlier in the year rather than later. So you want to hire heavy in the prior year's Q4 and in the current year's Q1. Do not wait to hire reps in Q3 and Q4. They're basically worthless this year. You want to hire them in the prior year's ending, so like November, December timeframe. That's why we're doing this annual planning exercise now to get a jump on it. And in the January, February. And if you have recruiters, make sure that they're not hiring for like the tech people then. if you have a bandwidth constraint, make sure they're only hiring for quota capacity people. Like, you should not be hiring for an FP&A analyst in Q1 if you could be hiring for sales reps who hold a quota. All right. So what I said can be changed a bit depending on the company's geographies or segments. So as an example, Q2 is actually the busiest time of the year if you sell to the federal government or state-run schools. So Q2 in that sense is your Q4. But the point remains the same. So let's talk about the sales pod and the surrounding resources. This is something that I have studied very in depth. So the unit, the typical sales pod is built around one quota carrying rep. A rep is an individual contributor. They're the person who's holding the bag and bringing in new deals, right? They don't have anybody reporting to them. And that rep is going to have a manager. They're going to have an SE, so that's the technical portion of the sale. And they're going to have a BDR, a business development rep, who is passing them leads. And so the rep's manager may have a span of control of 6 to 8 other reps, while the system engineers and SDRs may be on like single or double or triple duty, right? So they could be covering multiple or helping out multiple AEs. And that's going to depend on the segment they cover. So you can have lower ratios for enterprise, higher ratios for SMB. And so in good times, it's common to see these ratios balloon, right? So you get rich in basically, the golden era, 2021 SaaS. SMB reps were sometimes even getting BDR support, and that didn't last long. Usually SMB reps don't get any BDR support. They have to go and find their own leads. It's typical for BDRs in the mid-market to pull double or triple duty, and then it's very typical that each enterprise rep gets their own BDR. SE, you can usually assume a similar ratio for the system engineers as the BDRs, right? And then the span of control, I like to say that managers can go up to like 8 people. Enterprise may only be 5, but talk to your CRO or whoever's heading up sales and be like, listen, how many people can these sales managers manage? Because you have to budget for those too. I've actually fallen victim to forgetting to budget for the managers of the people who were holding the quotas. And that can be expensive because remember, they're overlays. They're not actually bringing in deals by themselves. So let me give you some common mistakes with sales capacity planning. I'd write some of these down as a sanity check at the end. So the first one is just flat out not building enough capacity. So you need to make sure you always have enough butts and seats to cover your board plan. And so I've been in situations where sales reps, they just took longer to ramp than we thought, or we sucked at hiring. We just couldn't hire enough new people. So what we had to do was adjust the expectations of what they would be capable of achieving. And so this is called having a capacity gap. It's terrible. And as a result, not hiring enough people, we didn't have enough dollars on the street and we couldn't hit our plan. And that's terrible because you can't just ramp people overnight. Like I said, it's better to start over-indexing on capacity and get stricter on performance management and manage the bottom feeders out rather than trying to play catch-up all year. Playing catch-up from Q1 is like it's a terrible place to be. You feel like you're always scrambling and you don't have your feet under you. The next big mistake is promoting away your BDR pool. So it's always easier to promote from within than finding a net new AE off the street. So one, it's great for morale, right? So it gives people who've been with the org career momentum, which is what you want. And it's great for cost because they don't need to come in at the midpoint or even the high point of pay for the position off the bat, so they can grow into it. So you don't have to pay like full value off the street. And these people hopefully already know the product if they're getting promoted and they've worked there. And that cuts down on your ramp time. So they get up to speed better. So it's a win-win for everyone. But remember, you got to backfill that BDR, that business development rep, with a net new one. And if you don't, the AEs, new and old, won't have enough leads to chase. And so don't cheap out on BDRs. That's what I'm trying to say. Like, make sure you staff enough of them. I usually actually have like 2 additional ones open and incremental to the plan that are like flex capacity ones, because I know a lot of BDRs aren't going to work out or they will get promoted. And they're cheaper, younger talent. So it eventually works its way downstream. Next one is not allowing managers to backfill poor performance. Bad breath is not better than no breath, right? If the sales managers know they can't backfill a role due to budget constraints, they'll keep mediocre and poor performing reps around because they just want to get a couple more dollars in the door, even if they know that these people aren't great. And that's going to really erode your culture in the long term. So don't be like a penny wise, pound foolish of like, no backfills, because what ends up happening is you have some really terrible reps that just stay on board too long. Next mistake, using illusory, hard word, efficiency gains as a plug. So it happens every year. You have an extra 5% of quota capacity you're trying to build to. So you do this thing at the end and you go into the assumption sheet and you say, well, I think our people have been here long enough that we're just going to do 5% better. It's just kind of like a made up thing. Like we're going to be 5% better at what we do. And so you could say, oh, we're going to bring on better systems, or people have just been in roles longer, or hey, our brand name's gaining traction in the market. And so it's all just wishful thinking to do the math, to make the math, and just don't do it. I've done it. A couple final sanity checks here. So 1/3 of your sales reps should be individual quota carriers. If the ratio is less than 1/3, you are probably running a bloated ship with too many supporting casts. So go back and check your ratios for BDRs, SEs, sales managers. Once again, 1/3 should be individual unique quota carriers. Next one, fully ramped quotas should be 5 times the reps on target earnings. So you get into trouble when you start building teams with these highly paid reps who only have moderately high quotas. This is what I call the proverbial no man's land. So the company isn't necessarily losing money, but you're not really making any money either, right? And so the issue gets worse when you have a big chunk of new expensive reps ramping and building pipeline, which may take up to 9-10 months in the enterprise while bringing literally zero cash flow. And so I've been at companies where we were just enamored by talent and we hired them all at this huge price tag, but then we gave that person the same quota as the people that were already on board and paid less than them. And so the math just didn't hang. Another one, will you be okay with 80% quota achievement? So beware, like I said, 20 to 30% annualized attrition on sales teams. So it's higher than the rest of the org typically for sales. So a lot of reps will just quit. They'll hit the road when they determine they won't hit their number. And it's going to be hard to predict macroeconomic conditions. We're all subject to it. And that big deal risk will play in when the economy gets worse. Stuff will shift from quarter to quarter, and you got to price that risk into your quota assignment coverage. And one more, transaction volumes required to hit your numbers. Make sure they're not like totally wacky. So your ACVs, your average contract values, or your average deal sizes should check out with the imputed volume of transactions that each rep needs to close each quarter. So if you need an SMB rep to close 10 deals at $8,000 a pop a quarter to hit their quota, okay, maybe that's fine. But if the math then says you need an enterprise rep to close 10 deals at 80,000 a pop per quarter to hit their number, that doesn't work, right? Like there aren't enough hours in the day, there aren't enough deals that you can close within that period. So I always like to make sure that you have something that makes sense in terms of deal volume in the model too. Don't just do the check with dollars, do it also with number of transactions. And it plays into your finance team and your sales ops team and your deal desk team. Can they handle this avalanche of deals? If you can't process deals to get them over the goal line, the customers are just going to leave. So that's an overview of the sales portion of this planning. All right, let's talk a little bit of marketing, kid. All right. Marketing, generating pipeline coverage. So what's a pipeline coverage multiple? This is working backwards based on an assumed conversion rate and coming up with a multiple of sales quota that you want your marketing team to generate in qualified ops. Okay. So for most SaaS companies, it's assumed to be anywhere between 200% or 2 and 350% or 3.5 of your net new ARR target. And that's going to depend on the sales engine and the geography. So for SMB deals that have shorter sales cycles, they can be spun up faster than enterprise deals. You can build pipeline faster for the SMB. So you can assume a smaller ratio. I've seen high velocity companies that need less than like 2x pipeline because they're so efficient. And so, quick example, if you want to close 10 million in new SMB deals in Q2 at a 2x target pipeline ratio, you're going to need 20 million of opportunities across all your marketing channels. Okay. So the overassignment part, remember we talked about that with sales. So the number of leads needs to be based on quota, which is between 20% to 30% higher financial plan, like we said, if you are overassigned. And so the marketing targets need to align with the quota you've put on the street, right? So that means you can't link it to the financial plan, which is lower, because you'll end up with a gap and set your sales team up to come up short, okay? This isn't all on the marketing team. A lot of it is, but there is this thing called sales generated pipeline. So marketing is not responsible for all of it. Much of it is sales generated. And so salespeople are marketers to the company too. They don't like to admit it. So it's common for sales teams to take at least 20% of the burden associated with generating pipeline. And so what you can do is you can reduce the required number of leads that marketing is on the hook for by an agreed upon percent that the sales team will kick in, right? They're banging the phones too. And the same thinking applies if you're a channel driven org, right? So you're selling through a marketplace. Let's say it's like an AWS or like a vendor. The associated pipeline contributed from these partners should reduce the marketing targets as well. So don't forget about that. And product-driven pipelines. So I've worked at product-led growth orgs before, and so the same thinking is going to apply. So the product should drive a certain number of registrations, which will also reduce the number of net new leads that the marketing team is responsible for generating. Often, though, product qualified leads, so PQL, coming from the PLG motion, that's going to be embedded into the marketing number. So it's less of a reduction, but rather an inclusion to the number the marketing team gets credit for. But like that is like a super intricate part. So this is your first rodeo. Don't even think about that. All right, the funnel, the marketing funnel. You can Google what one of these looks like too. I'll describe it for you. So in my simple mind, there are 5 lead sources. This is just how I think about it. And so each will contribute a percentage towards the segment's overall contribution. So the first one is a product qualified lead. You'll hear it called a PQL, product qualified lead. This is someone who's experienced value from using your product as a result of a free trial, right? They've used it. These are the highest quality leads. These are the hot ones, guys. The next one is website, someone who's registered for something on your website. This could be an ebook. They could fill out a contact form. Next one's conference, someone who's given you their contact info at a conference, like a business card, right? You met them. Who's business cards anymore? And then paid, someone you're able to track down based on paid advertising. These are generally a bit lower quality leads, like if it was a Google paid ad. And then you have outbound or account-based marketing. So these ones are expensive to get. ABM. So you may know someone who works on an ABM team. These are hyper-specific outbound and generally reserved for enterprise because it's targeted, it's very personal, and you may be sending them like an expensive Yeti cooler. You may be sending them tickets to a game or something like that. And so we understand the 5 types of lead sources. Let's talk about the funnel stages that each of these sources now go through. Okay, so you start to visualize. So you have the top of the funnel. That's going to be anyone you're trying to attract and get to know better. Then you have marketing qualified leads, which is called an MQL. And that's going to be an individual or an organization that has engaged with your marketing efforts and could become a customer with proper nurturing. Then you have a sales accepted lead, an SAL. This is a marketing qualified lead, an MQL, that's been reviewed and got the green checkbox by the sales team according to whatever lead scoring criteria they have. Sometimes sales team is super stringent about these. Sometimes they're cool about it. But the difference between an MQL and an SAL is usually buyer's intent. That's what the sales team is going to be looking for. Knowing that this lead is actually serious about buying and that they do have budget, right? They're looking to confirm that this person is serious and has budget. All right, then you get to opportunities. So SALs, sales accepted leads, become ops once the sales team decides to work on them, right? We're going to dig in and then we're going to actually estimate the timeline to close. All right, takeaway, get this number right, if nothing else in this pipeline. So you get this number right and then you work backwards. So when you model it out mathematically, it will flow as ops to SAL to MQL to top of the funnel. All right, so what am I doing here? I'm grossing it all up. So in this marketing exercise, I'm essentially working backwards. The lead funnel calc really will work backwards, and you're grossing up at each step based on the expected conversion rate, okay? So we know our required pipeline coverage at the bottom of the funnel, and we have the best command of our historical opportunity numbers, okay? So this gives us the foundation to build upon, since the top of the funnel activity tomorrow is not as certain, right? That's the biggest guess. It's important to note, though, that if you're working backwards to net new ARR, which does not contemplate any expansion dollars in your plan, that's what you're doing here. You are working backwards to net new ARR. And to assume that the sales team and customer success team drive the expansion dollars, not marketing in this exercise, okay? So a bit of details there. So we're talking about net new dollars. Let's talk about setting the pace. So marketing pipeline needs to front run the segment supporting by whatever the average deal cycle is, okay? So marketing pipeline has to show up before the deals because it takes time to close them. And so you need to lag your pipeline so it's generated before each of the segment's sales goals each quarter. And so you're going to look at each sales team's goals and say, what do I need to generate by this date to be prepared for the quota retirement required? So SMB, it can be generated in quarter because remember, a quarter is 3 months. SMB deal can be spun up in a month or two. So it could be a 0 quarter lag. Mid-market, maybe it's a 1 quarter, 3-month lag. And enterprise, maybe it's 2 quarters or 6-month lag. And so an example, that means in the enterprise, our ability to generate leads in Q3 will be important to know in Q1, right? In order for the leads to show up on time. Tracking costs, marketing costs here. All right. So you're going to want to talk to your CMO, who is going to be responsible for a big portion of this marketing budget. So you have a bunch of teams within the marketing team. Okay. So potential teams, maybe the demand gen team, the product marketing team, the events team, and marketing ops, or MOPS. What a silly acronym. And you're going to want to come up with a pick list, I call it, for your CMO to budget against. And so you want this to be mutually exclusive, and it's what the marketing team can use to categorize expenses with each of those teams. So like I said, demand gen, product marketing, events, marketing ops, to give an example. Within those, they'll have the ability to assign expenses. And so expenses may be design, online advertising, offline advertising, sponsorships, PR, social media, channel or partner stuff, events, trade shows, collateral or gifts, incentives or promos, contractors, consultants, software, and your big ass annual conference. And so you want each of those expenses to be a potential use case within each of those teams, but they don't have to actually use them all. I have a life hack, so you may want to write this one down, even the experienced people out there. If you have a big conference, give it its own line. Don't try to bury it in a larger events line. Like if you have a user conference that spans multiple teams, park it in the events team and then put a distinct line for annual conference, right? You want to put all the budget dollars there. It'll make your life easier. Okay. Let's go over some common mistakes with the marketing budget. So the first one is having a wacky split between programs and people. Okay. So programs are like all the things you're doing to drive demand and where you're spending money, other than the salary and benefits of your people on the marketing team. So a new marketing team will have more people costs and program costs, right? Because you have to hire people to go out and actually spend it. And the pendulum will swing in a different direction as you hire more people. But in general, the split should never really go more than 60-40 in either direction between people and programs. The next one, this is a mistake that I see a lot of companies do. It's ramping their quarter over quarter pipeline too fast. So you can't have this massive ramp in pipeline like immediately after one quarter without actually deploying more spend to get there. So I always do the sanity check at the end where I look at the net increase in pipeline and I make sure that the corresponding increases in spend are there to support them, right? I can't just have the marketing team create this massive uplift in pipeline without looking and seeing their budgeting dollars there. Okay. The next one here is not thinking at all about the year after this year. Weird thing to say. So even though this is a plan for the coming year, you need to think about 18 months out. So if your enterprise team needs 9 months of pipeline ahead of time, you need to start building the following year's Q1 and Q2 of this year. Yes, that's wild. I know. But don't freak out about it because most planning teams will check in with marketing to make sure that they have enough coverage for the following year, but halfway through the current year as they're planning for it. So this is why we do this budgeting exercise on a continuous rolling basis. So just peg that number in the meantime to the latest in your quarter until you have more data mid-year, and then you can up it later. The next one here is over allocating pipeline to channel, another mistake. So your partners are incentive driven, just like your sales reps are. And if you're not going to actually invest your program dollars with them, you can't expect too much of a return. Okay. So it requires you to really think through how much partner marketing and development funds you're actually willing to invest. The next one, over indexing on one source. So not all sources are equal, and also not all sources are endless. So yeah, I mean, you want to max out your PQLs first, your product qualified leads, but after that, you'll have to move down on your list of sources for the next bang for your buck. Okay. And same thing, like you're probably not going to be able to get 100% of your leads from like Google demand gen, right? Eventually, there are diminishing returns there. All right. So that's marketing. What we're going to do next is talk about expenses. All right. So if there's one thing you should take away from this expense overview, it's follow the headcount. All right. Follow the headcount cookie crumbs. So cost buildup should start and end with headcount. Why? Headcount should be an input and a driver. Believe it or not, 75% of costs of tech companies, they're going to walk on 2 feet. And that makes nailing your headcount forecast key to budgeting success. So not only is payroll the majority of your costs, it's also a driver for the majority of indirect costs. Yeah. So your software licenses, your office expenses, your rent, that's not a people cost, but it's driven by the number of people you have on board. So it's less about matching the dollars in the model to people and more about using the people to come up with the dollars in the model. Okay. So you may have an idea of where you want your cash burn and profitability to shake out, but to validate that, you have to build up from the bottom, starting with the employees. So we'd said it before, max headcount figures as a backstop. So from an OpEx, that's operating expense perspective, the most crucial part of this process is coming up with the max headcount figures by department, preferably phased by quarter. And so leaders should hire throughout the year to stay within the bounds of a total team size. This is where the annual plan is truly made or broken. This is truly where the annual plan either works or doesn't work, full stop. So first, you have to establish this baseline. So in terms of putting numbers on paper, pick a date, like the end of November. I usually do the end of September because it's the end of Q3, and I draw a hard line in the sand. And this is where I'm going to tally how many people are on board, and I'm also going to tally how many potential job recs we may open in the next 3 months. Those are also going to be included in my headcount number that I budget with each leader, right? Don't let those get stuck in that no man's land, in that gray area, okay? So count how many people are on board and then count number of recs that are still open. And if you didn't have a company last year and you're a new founder listening to this, it'll actually be a lot easier. Just decide what you want to pay yourself and your co-founders, and that's the baseline to start at least. All right, so a list of possible expense types that are going to go into this, right? So we said that headcount's the most important. You're going to need salary and benefits. So for US-based employees, you can usually use a 20 to 25% uplift of the salary. That's an estimate for benefits like health insurance, dental insurance, life insurance. I've written about this on mostlymetrics.com. You can check for other countries as well. Some are more, some are less. Commissions, this should be reserved for the sales team, and you sanity check this as a percentage of revenue. You generally want to keep this below 12%. I've also written about benchmarking commission rates on the newsletter blog thing. Jig. Contractors, this is effective labor, right? They aren't full-time employees, but it's flex capacity for specialized stuff or project work like design or copywriting. And so I often put placeholders in each department for contractor work. So you often don't know you need it until you start the project or begin building a new product. So I've learned this from years in the past where I didn't put any contractor budget in there. And then halfway through the year, the product person comes to me or the CPO and they're like, hey, we want to launch a payments product. We don't have any payments expertise. Can we hire a consultant? And I'm like, well, I didn't plan for that. So now I just plan like, hey, we're going to put a $10,000 per quarter earmarked amount, and we can come back to it if we need it. Professional services, that's another expense type. So lawyers, bookkeepers, tax accountants. The advice here is that if you plan to raise money in the coming year, reserve at least $100K in lawyer fees just for this event. So you may argue to put this below the line as a one-time expense, but it's still going to chew up cash and completely ruin your professional services budget if you don't think about it now. So if in your plan you're going to raise money, put a placeholder for extra lawyer fees and the like. Next one, rent. So you think about allocating this based on headcount once you surpass 100 people, but until then, you can just park it in G&A, a shared overhead, figure out what the office expense is. Subscriptions, that's the cost for software tools, Salesforce, Adobe, Miro. That'll be driven by the number of people within each department, probably, unless it's a usage-based product, then you'll have to do a little bit of extra work. Marketing, we just went over that. Travel, this is useful to break into teams, internal travel versus customer revenue generating travel. The travel we like, which is a different bucket. And so advice here, even for the experienced people, is that travel should always follow the person who's doing the traveling back to their department. So if you're booking travel for, say, a person in product who's traveling to cover the marketing booth at a conference, don't throw that cost back in marketing, right? Put the budget for that person traveling in product and then let them do their thing and then charge it there. So if you have the budget there, it's not a big deal. Office expenses, paper, pens, that disgusting Flavia coffee, and food. So you can budget for and embed most of these expense categories within each team. So I'm designing basically this GL list. And you don't have to use them all, right? So like you're never going to use the marketing program line that we talked about in customer support, but hey, it's there. All right. So this is a nuanced discussion, but what belongs in cost of goods sold, right? So to get to your gross margin, you got to figure out what costs go up there. So think of COGS as your cost to serve a customer on an ongoing basis. So it's going to be what you need to spend to make sure customers are getting value out of your product after you get them the boat. So I always break COGS into 3 buckets. These are my rules of thumb. So I usually think it's people, tools, and then hosting infrastructure. So the first one, people. This could be this is the customer support people for break fix stuff. It may be customer success people too. Do a whole podcast on this of where customer success belongs. Is it in sales? Is it in COGS? But adoption and upsell. I think there's a good argument to put customer success in sales, not in COGS. If the people carry a quota, that's usually how I look at it, black and white. Do you have a quota? No. All right, you go in COGS. If you do, you go in sales. But if they don't carry a bag, I don't. I personally don't think they should burden your gross margin. The next one, tools or data. So this could be for APIs. It could also be software like Ask Nicely, Zendesk, Turn Zero, and then hosting and infrastructure. So AWS, your cloud build, GCP, Snowflake. Okay, so that's what costs look like. A couple of benchmarks here. So what the costs look like at the department level. These are like sanity checks. So they're not the end all be all. But if I look at the sales team at the end of this, probably 75% or more is going to be people on payroll and commissions. 15% maybe is tools. Big one's going to be like a Salesforce or HubSpot, or it could be sales efficiency like a Gong, Zoom Info, LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It could be meeting management like Calendly, Vidyard. It could be contract management like DocuSign, and then 10% for travel. And that'll be split into client facing stuff and then internally, like small hands. Next one, marketing. We went through the split before. It's going to be somewhere between 50-50, 60-40 on either split between people and programs. Product, that's going to be largely people, 70% probably people, 25% tools. Some of their tools may include project management stuff like Miro, ClickUp, Asana. They may have some design tools like Figma, Full Story, Adobe, and then 5% travel. Product people do like to travel a lot and get together and talk and do whatever product people do. Engineering, this one needs to be over 90%, guys. 90% people. Then they do have a couple of tools, but a lot of them are free, to be honest. GitLab, Docker, Postman. And I'm always surprised that a lot of dev tools are relatively cheap. And as a CFO, I almost never say that. It actually hurts that I'm saying that. Most do start as free. And then very minimal travel. If your engineering team is traveling a lot, something is very, very broken. Finance, that's going to have at least 60% people cost. This one's lower on people because you have a lot of tools that are expensive to support the rest of the org as overhead. So how you track your money in and your money out. So that could be ADP, Bill.com, Brex could be like sponsor of this podcast. Mercury, finance and accounting tools like NetSuite. Shout out NetSuite. QuickBooks Zero could be treasury and procurement stuff like a Kariba, Coupa, Value, or cap table management. Carta, love Carta here. And then you have your professional fees, usually sitting within finance. You got your lawyers, and you get your audit, and you get your tax, and then a bit of travel, but I don't travel that much. HR, sanity check, usually over 80% people, but then you do have some tool spend on recruiting. It's really advertising. I always think of recruiting spend within HR as essentially like a marketing cost. It's kind of funny, but it is within HR because you're marketing the company to potential people. That could be LinkedIn, Built With, Indeed, Monster, Glassdoor. And then you have your HRS tools like a Workday, Bamboo, and then payroll stuff like Gusto. All right, then every company ends up with this, but kind of this nebulous G&A bucket that's not really in finance though. But like the CEO will probably go here, maybe the COO, maybe if you have admin or facility workers, stuff like that. And then I always throw tools that are shared throughout the org here. So that could be Zoom, Slack, G Suite, rather than allocating it out to the departments if you're below like 25 million in ARR. Past that, I would start to allocate it, but before then, it's just kind of like a waste of your time. It just takes a lot of time to do, and people don't understand the people who own the departments don't always understand why you're allocating it to them, and they think it's a punishment. I also do put a lot of security and compliance stuff here, like a CrowdStrike, a JFrog, or a Datadog, because that's helping the whole org. And then rent and overhead, if I'm not allocating it, I'll put it here. And then exec travel, I usually put a fluffy budget here. Always park a couple of NetJet hours. Oh yeah, baby. Something I do want to talk about, laptops. So laptops are a cash expense. They get amortized on the balance sheet over time, and it's the biggest cost for new hires, right? It could be $2,000. Make sure you budget for at least one laptop for every new person. Although it may not hit your P&L right away, it is a scary sight when like a CDW will send you this bill for like 20 times 2,000 MacBooks. And also add in a hardware refresh. Assume maybe 20 to 25% of your org needs a net new laptop. Every year, I forget to budget for laptops. This will not be the year I forget to budget for laptops. Okay. Annual bonuses, something else to keep track of here. For non-salespeople at software companies, they usually have an annual bonus based on percentage of their salary. So maybe a 10% annual bonus. Say they make 120K, so they get 12,000 paid in the next fiscal year based on the prior year's outcome. And at many tech companies, these bonuses are at board discretion, but they always seem to get magically paid out in full. Or else the employees, you'd have a revolt on your hands. You would. These bonuses are not commissions, so do not put them there. And this is why I want to go over this. So commissions are only for salespeople, full stop. You have to have a quota to get commissions. So put a new general ledger code for bonuses. So although no cash will exchange hands during the year, right? These bonuses are only paid out one time. The accounting team should still accrue. This is an expense each month, as if you're going to hit 100% by year end. So, for the example above, the accounting team would accrue an expense of $1,000 to the person with a $12,000 potential bonus each month, expecting to pay it out at year end. If you suck next year and don't get 100%, the accounting team can reverse that accrual, right? And you can cancel the boat that you pre-ordered. Sorry. One more sanity check here for costs. Implementation costs. So if you're doing a big software install, let's say it's a new ERP, don't forget about the one-time setup fees that you'll get smacked with. I forgot about this before. So implementation and professional services fees can be like 3 times higher actually in the first year for some major systems. Don't forget to put that one-time cost in. So if you're getting like a Workday or Salesforce and you're buying those tools, don't forget to also budget for the professional fees and really the bandwidth constraints internally with the associated time to go live. I'm gonna need to like towel myself off after this. All right, this is the last section. If there's one thing I know, it's that both your budget and my budget will both be, quote, wrong at the end of the year. So I know you didn't want to hear that after this whole song and dance, but those are the facts. It's just really a matter of who's less wrong. Yeah. So I always tell my teams that budgeting for anything that's in hypergrowth mode is really, really hard. I mean, trying to like predict anything in life that's literally doubling each year. It's kind of like the stupid carnival trick where they spin you around, they blindfold you, and they ask you to throw a dart at a board that's also moving. That's what budgeting in hypergrowth mode feels like. And so planning for a year, especially in macro like turbulence, that's also hard. Or if you're coming off like a COVID year where you were growing a ton and you don't really know like how true that baseline will be, also hard to do. Here are a couple tips. Number one, take your bottoms up headcount build seriously. So like I said, 70% or more of costs at software companies walk on 2 feet. So to hedge the bets that you're taking in your operating plan, start by seriously looking at the headcount. Everything else is going to follow. So if you don't believe me, approximately 2/3 of your software tooling is probably expense on a per head, per license basis until the usage-based revolution truly takes over. After tooling, the next biggest expense is office space, to be honest. And these are long-term commitments that you don't want to lock in without knowing how many people are actually going to show up every day. I do think, there is a direct correlation between the quality of the snacks in the office and the number of people who show up. I did stop showing up at the office when they replaced Welch's fruit snacks with the Costco brand Fig Newtons. Those are pretty brutal. I digress. And travel should be forecasted by person as well, and by activity and by staffing level, exec versus the plebeians. Folks, what I just rattled off there in the last 30 seconds, that's 90% of your expenses. If I was a betting man, you've eliminated a lot of tail risk by getting headcount right. That's why headcount is so important. So you should begin the process by doing a tops down percentage build of headcount by department, then perform the actual bottoms up build with the leaders, and finally sanity check what dropped out of that, right? So you got the budget envelopes of max headcount per quarter. The next one is to spend extra time interlocking with the engineering and product teams, right? And that's because it's going to eventually impact your revenue forecast. If you don't build a product in an agreeable time frame, the revenue isn't going to show up that's associated with. You want to figure out what your R&D payback period is. Usually you don't want it to be any more than 18 months. So you're putting that dollar in of engineering product spend. When does that turn into $3, $4, $5, right? The next one is building a plan that gets your salespeople paid. Perhaps the biggest mistake I've seen at companies is setting the sales goals too high. Okay. I know you probably didn't expect CFO to say that, but hear me out. So in a downturn, companies are always trying to play catch up on the top line goals that they're not hitting. So they get even more aggressive on what they believe sales achievement should look like. And they raise the numbers while also cutting down on the supporting resources that the sales teams rely on. So the ratios of BDRs per sales rep go up. So 2-to-1 jumps to 3-to-1 to cut headcount expenses. So we don't need more BDRs. And the marketing program budget gets peeled back. So no more conferences. Nobody go to those. And then you don't buy them any more tools. So no gong. Guess what happens? The salespeople get all pissed off and they leave when they inevitably don't hit their number and they don't get paid. So now you have a super aggressive goal, not enough quota carrying capacity to come within a Hail Mary throw of the plan. And not to mention, you have serious morale issues on your hands. So you've dug yourself into a worse hole, actually, by trying to play catch up. And then what happens? The gap between plan and attainment grows even wider next quarter, and you have to make cuts. So I call this the quota death spiral, the QDS. I think I've made it up. It's taken the souls of many great software companies. And if sales teams are struggling to make quota, you're going to start closing crappier deals before everyone eventually walks away and the quota death spiral truly sets in. You may be left with an okay CAC payback period, but your net dollar retention is going to stink if you're on annual contracts because your customers are going to follow your salespeople out the door the first chance they get if they were duped into buying something that isn't a mutual fit, because your salespeople will try to pull a Hail Mary and sell crappy deals. And so it's a slippery slope. Things will get a lot worse if you don't take care of your salespeople. So don't cut commission corners and make sure you have enough commission in the budget. Check that commission line. Don't be cheap. One more takeaway for you before we go. So ensure you can hit your cash burn budget for the first half of the year. All right. So it's Q1 and Q2. So the best way to make sure you don't have to make cuts in the second half is to not spend too much in the first half of the year. Okay. I know I'm keeping it super simple here, but put placeholders in your first half budget for things that may come up. So a little extra expense cushion. So the two most common unforeseen expenses are contractors for the short-term projects and price increases that you forgot you'd get charged for your software renewals. I've fallen victim to this. If you're experienced, you may want to write that one down to get to all of us. What I've done in the past, take whatever my first half or even total year budget is for contractors, and then put those placeholders in for projects that will inevitably come up, maybe 10% on top of it. And the same goes for software tools. So just beat your vendors to the punch and add a cushion of 5% to each tool in your budget. This is like a total life hack. And if they don't jack up the cost on you, boom, you're a hero. Put the money in your pocket, go to your board meeting and beat OpEx by 3 to 5%. You should definitely feel great about your first half burn numbers if you paid attention to the headcount piece. Also throw in a couple placeholders on the way. So, I'm going to sign off now. I'm tired. I'm out of water. So everybody go forth, whether this is your first annual plan, your second, your 100th. You'd be pretty old if you've done 100 of these or you've messed up a lot in here. But with blessings of high LTV to CAC, CJ. Woo! Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.